Hey, what's up, folks? This is Ryan Conway from ExperienceGear.net. Today we should be pouring ourselves a glass of nice warm tea because we're going to be looking at a bike that is coming from a classic British company. And that bike is the Orange Switch 6. Yeah, that shot didn't turn out particularly good. Great. Lovely. Anyways, today we're looking at the Orange Switch 6. Orange recently came out with a newer version of this bike this summer, in the summer of 2023. But today we're actually looking at the first iteration, which originally came out in 2020. We're not going to go into the particular build kits and all of the particular numbers on this bike. If you want further details, you can check that out on our detailed review at ExperienceGear.net. But today we're going to be talking mostly just about the riding characteristics. So, like most of our reviews, it's going to be pretty short. So, starting with the climbing of the bike. So, getting right into it, this bike is got 145 millimeters out back and 160 millimeters out front. So you're going to kind of expect, like a lot of bikes in this category, that's going to pedal acceptably, but not maybe the best thing that's out there, with it being, you know, somewhat heavy, somewhat big, somewhat long. It's great for sitting and spinning like you would typically find here out in the Western Cascades, just climbing up a fire road. However, if you have a slightly more technical climb, especially in tight single track, the Orange really kind of struggles, and I would chalk that up to slightly less efficient pedal efficiency compared to other bikes in this category, as well as being quite long. So I really found myself needing to really plan ahead early and often, both to maintain momentum as well as to set up line choice. But once that was done, and once I got used to that process, it was actually fairly straightforward, and it was something that I kind of became accustomed to. So in the grand scheme of things, not the biggest end of the game there, but overall, like, don't expect the Orange Switch 6 is going to be a good proxy for a cross-country bike or even kind of a shorter travel trail bike. It will pedal as a bike that is maybe 10 to 15 millimeters longer in travel than it actually is. A great comparison to this bike would be the Specialized Stumpjumper Evo, which is a far better, far more efficient pedaling bike comparatively. But quite frankly, if you're going to be interested in this bike, you're probably not going to be interested in pedaling performance. You're really going to be looking at it from a descending performance. And again, on most terrain, I would kind of chalk this bike kind of up in the fine category again. On smooth, moderate terrain, the Orange is acceptable. It's not necessarily the most efficient at pumping and maintaining momentum, but pointing it downhill, it does feel rather planted. In kind of long sweeping corners, whether they're supported or not supported, the really long wheelbase of this bike, and it's almost 1.2 meters long in the size medium, which is kind of crazy to think about. But because of that kind of centroid location of your body, it really encourages you to maintain that speed, be aggressive on your leaning position, and really stay centered kind of between those wheels and really push the bike, which is great. However, when you start to get into more kind of moderate terrain that's maybe a moderate pitch with some moderate chunk, the mulleted rear wheel does start to get a little bit hung up, and that in combination with the single swing arm for the rear end does start to kind of pull the bike back in its momentum. Typically, what you would do in these situations on a bike like this, where it is starting to get hung up on square edge hits, you typically try to jump over those features. But with this bike being so long, both in the front end and on the chainstay length, it's pretty hard to actually pick up. I stand about 5'6", 5'7", depending on how well rested I am on that day. And with I think it's a 468 millimeter reach and a very, very long chainstay at 447 millimeters, it's quite hard to pick up and kind of put down like you would other trail bikes or enduro bikes that are out there. So you're really going to be well planted, but that is going to be to your detriment on kind of these moderately steeped, moderately chunky trails. And in multiple circumstances on these types of terrain, it was quite interesting to ride with friends that were of a similar pace on similar bikes, but then being on the Orange the following day, watching them pull away in acceleration, just because of the way that this bike handled that type of terrain. Now, I've been kind of talking about a lot of the negatives of this bike. You know, there's definitely some positives though, and that's when you start to really put this bike into very steep terrain. In very steep terrains, when you're going over a 30-degree standard pitch down the fall line of a trail, the Switch 6 really excels. That longer wheelbase as well, in combination with the mulleted rear wheel, really allow the rider to have just the utmost of confidence. I've never felt so confident on steep, gnarly, rowdy trails as I have on this bike. That long wheelbase and slack head angle allow you to feel really planted, feel very confident. And then at the exit of a lot of these steeper chutes that you would typically find here in Western Washington, you're typically getting some kind of janky, weird ass, hard, tight corner. And the mulleted rear wheel really allows you to kind of muscle your way through and kind of flick that rear end up, even though it does have that long chainstay that I talked about before. So that's really the terrain where this bike really excels. Last but not least, we touched on this earlier when we were talking about the chunkier terrain sections, but the jumping performance of this bike. Man, this long bike is, again, you're going to be wanting to hit kind of cheese wedge jumps. Steep lippy jumps are going to be a little bit challenging to do on this. You're going to hit the lip of the jump, take a water break, walk the dog, have a cup of tea, maybe even take a shit, come back to the bike, and then at that point the rear wheel will be leaving the lip at that point, just because it's so freaking long. So again, very well planted, but don't expect this bike to be kind of your do-all, end-all for the type of bike that is going to want to get airborne all the time. So with all that said, who's this bike for, and who should be looking at it? I think that it kind of chalks up to two different types of riders. The first and foremost are going to be slightly taller riders than myself that are going to be able to get along with the more aggressive angles, and in particular the more aggressive chainstay length, which is the same length across the entire platform. So I would say riders that are at least 5'10" and up are going to get the most out of this bike. And in that height range, those types of riders are going to want to be spending most of their time on very steep, rowdy, gnarly terrain. If that doesn't sound like you, I would probably look elsewhere. If that does sound like you, yeah, this bike is awesome. It's pretty hard pressed to be beaten. The other rider that's really going to get a lot out of this bike is going to be maybe somebody that is not necessarily looking for the utmost performance when it comes to their riding, but they want something that is kind of more of a conversation piece. While having this bike out on the trails, I've never had so many people come up to me and ask me about it. It's a really unique bike here in North America. You rarely, if ever, see orange, and orange has been around forever. So people that have been spending a lot of time or have been riding for a long time know about the brand, but have maybe seen one once. So I've kind of equated it to people that have asked me about it as the Chrysler Prowler of mountain bikes. It looks cool. It's really unique. It may not be the best performing bike, but it's a pretty interesting bike to own, and it's a pretty cool bike to talk about. So those are kind of the two people that I would think would get the most out of Orange Switch 6. So yeah, that's all we got for today. Pretty quick, short review. If you guys want more detail about what we think about the bike, as well as the history and graphics, as well as other reference material that we were able to put together, feel free to check out our full written review on our website at experiencegear.net. And thanks for checking out our review.